Two police cars stopped in front of Emily Mitchell's house just after sunrise, and the HOA president was standing beside them, pointing straight at the front door. But what happened in the next 10 minutes would shock the entire neighborhood and reveal a federal rule that changed everything. Emily Mitchell had lived in the quiet community of Cedar Ridge for 6 years. The small suburban house wasn't fancy, but it was filled with warmth. Every morning, she watered the flowers along the walkway while neighbors walked their dogs and waved hello. Her husband, Arthur Mitchell, worked long hours as an engineer, but they both loved the peaceful street. Everything began to change when the new HOA president took control. Brenda Kensington believed rules should be followed exactly as written. At first, it was simple notices: a complaint about the color of the mailbox, a warning about a garden bench near the porch. Then the letters became more serious. Brenda claimed Emily was violating HOA policies by running an unauthorized home business. Emily was confused. She wasn't running a business. She simply worked remotely for a national company, answering customer service calls from a laptop inside her living room. Arthur contacted the HOA to explain the misunderstanding. Brenda refused to reconsider, and 3 days later, she made a decision that stunned the entire neighborhood. She called the police and told them Emily needed to be removed from the property immediately. But Brenda had no idea that federal law was about to shut her plan down instantly. The police officers approached the front door calmly. Emily opened it with a confused expression, still holding her morning coffee. Behind them stood Brenda Kensington with a folder of documents in her hands. Brenda spoke first. She explained that the HOA had issued multiple violations and that Emily was refusing to comply with neighborhood rules. According to Brenda, the situation had reached the point where Emily should be removed from the property. The officers listened carefully. They asked Emily if she understood the complaint. Emily nodded politely. Then she explained something Brenda clearly hadn't expected. Emily worked from home because she had been granted a federal accommodation through her employer. A medical condition made commuting extremely difficult, so her company allowed her to perform her job remotely. Her work required only a laptop and a headset. No customers visited the home. No signs were displayed outside. It was simply quiet computer work. The officers exchanged a quick glance. Brenda insisted that the HOA banned businesses operating inside homes. But Emily calmly explained there was more to the situation. And when Arthur stepped outside holding a printed document, the entire conversation began to shift. Because the paper he was holding referenced a federal protection Brenda had completely overlooked. Arthur handed the document to one of the officers. It was an official accommodation approval connected to federal disability law. The letter explained that Emily's remote work arrangement was a protected accommodation under federal regulations. This meant her employer had the right to allow her to work from home if it supported her health needs. More importantly, the document clarified something critical. Local housing organizations and associations could not block reasonable accommodations connected to federally protected rights. The officer read the letter carefully. Then he turned to Brenda. He asked whether the HOA had reviewed any federal guidelines before issuing their eviction demand. Brenda hesitated. She insisted that the HOA rules clearly prohibited businesses operating from residential properties. But the officer explained something that changed the tone of the entire situation. HOA rules cannot override federal protections. The street had grown quiet as neighbors slowly gathered outside to watch. Brenda's confident posture began to fade, because the situation she thought was simple enforcement was turning into a legal mistake. And the next conversation would make that mistake even clearer. The second officer stepped forward and spoke calmly. He explained that Emily was not violating the law by working remotely. Many Americans worked from home, especially when medical accommodations were involved. The key issue was whether the activity created disruption in the neighborhood. In Emily's case, there were no customers visiting the property, no extra vehicles, no business signs, just a laptop and phone calls. The officer looked back at Brenda. He explained that attempting to remove someone from their home without proper legal authority could create serious problems for the HOA. Brenda's expression shifted from confident to uneasy. She opened her folder and began flipping through her papers. But none of the documents addressed federal accommodation protections. Arthur quietly stood beside Emily on the porch. He had expected another HOA argument. What he hadn't expected was police officers explaining federal housing law to the HOA president. Neighbors whispered quietly across the street. Brenda slowly realized that the situation she had tried to control was now slipping away, and the next moment would determine how the entire conflict ended. Brenda tried one final argument. She claimed the HOA board had voted to enforce the rule and that she was simply following community guidelines. But the officers explained that HOA boards must still follow federal law. Community rules could not cancel federally protected accommodations. One officer handed the document back to Arthur. Then he spoke directly to Brenda. He suggested the HOA review federal housing regulations before taking further action. Otherwise, the association could face serious legal challenges. Brenda's face turned pale. The neighbors watching from their lawns understood what had just happened. The HOA president had attempted to force a resident out of her home, and the law had stopped the situation immediately. Brenda quietly gathered her papers. Without another word, she walked back toward her car. The officers nodded politely to Arthur and Emily before returning to their patrol vehicles. The street slowly returned to its quiet morning routine, but the story of what had happened would travel quickly through the neighborhood. And the next HOA meeting would become one of the most important meetings the community had ever seen. A week later, the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse was packed. Residents filled every chair for the monthly HOA meeting. Everyone wanted to hear what the board would say about the incident. Brenda Kensington sat quietly at the front table, no longer speaking with the same confidence she once had. Arthur and Emily sat together near the back of the room. When the meeting began, another board member addressed the situation. He explained that the association had reviewed federal housing regulations after the police visit. The board acknowledged that Emily's remote work was a protected accommodation. The enforcement action had been a mistake. The room remained silent as the statement continued. The HOA would update its policies to ensure similar situations would never happen again. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Arthur glanced at Emily. For the first time in days, she looked relaxed. The conflict that had started with threats and police cars was ending in a much different way. And the final moment of the meeting would bring unexpected closure. At the end of the meeting, Brenda Kensington stood up slowly. Her voice was quieter than usual. She admitted that she had acted too quickly while enforcing the rules. She explained that she had not fully understood the federal protections connected to Emily's situation. The room remained calm. Several residents thanked Arthur and Emily for handling the situation respectfully. Instead of turning the conflict into a bigger legal battle, they had simply explained the facts and allowed the law to speak for itself. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed in small but meaningful ways. The HOA revised its guidelines and created clearer communication with residents. Emily continued her remote work peacefully from home. Every morning, she returned to watering the flowers along the walkway. Neighbors passed by, smiling and waving just like before. What began as a tense conflict had ended with a lesson the entire community would remember. Sometimes the strongest solutions come not from arguments, but from understanding the rules that protect everyone. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. Please subscribe to HOA Conflicts